Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the WTS Equity and Transportation panel. I'm Dewana Love, Chief Multimodal Transportation Engineer for Transmart, and also the WTS Diversity Committee Co-Chair with my partner, Gabriela Garcia. WTS Greater Chicago is excited to host today's panel discussion, focused on equity and transportation from a community perspective. Over the last year, we've all heard a lot about equity and how it impacts many aspects of daily life. Our goal is to offer a series of sessions to empower our industry to address matters of equity and transportation. Future topics will include project development strategies and workforce development, to name a few. To kick off the series, we have an impressive panel of regional experts from the CTA Red Line Extension Project, Transportation Equity Network, and the Far South Community Development Corporation to share their respective experience and strategies regarding community engagement. Today's program will include introductions by one of our partner firms and a presentation by each panelist, followed by a discussion with Q&A. So we invite you to enter your questions to incorporate in that session. Following the panel, I'll return for a brief wrap up and closing, and we promise to get you out of here no later than 6:15. To get us started, I'd like to introduce our partner firm representative, who will introduce our panelists and our moderator. And just for everyone's information, we will be recording this session. Paul Gregoire is the Chief Operating Officer for Globetrotters Engineering, a full-service A&E firm with clients that include the Chicago Department of Aviation, IDOT, CDOT, Cook County, the Capital Development Board, the RTA, and the Tollway. Prior to joining Globetrotters in January of 2020, Paul was the Bureau Chief of Construction for IDOT District 1, where he managed a construction program of over 300 projects valued at $500 million annually. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you, Dewana, and welcome everyone. I have the pleasure of introducing our esteemed panel. Today we have Lynda Lopez, Advocacy Manager for at Active Transportation Alliance. She's a writer and transportation advocate in Chicago. Lynda is an advocacy manager with the Active Transportation Alliance and recently co-authored a report on fair equity in the Chicagoland region. She is also a co-chair with the Transportation Equity Network. As an avid bike advocate, she was the Southwest Side representative for the Mayor's Bike Advisory Council. She serves on the Metropolitan Planning Council's Transportation Committee. On the national level, Lynda is a core organizer with the Untokening, a multiracial collective centering the lived experiences of marginalized communities to address mobility, justice, and equity. Lynda was part of the Transit Center's inaugural Women Changing Transit Mentorship Program. Welcome, Lynda. Next, we have Katanya Raby, Director of Planning at Far South Community Development Corporation. She's an urban planner, artist, and activist with over 10 years of professional experience in the nonprofit, government, and corporate sectors. As one who strives for equity across all that she does, Katanya focuses on equitable planning with communities in Chicago. She is an alum of the Chicago United for Equity Fellowship, co-founder and former president of Society of Black Urban Planners at UIC, and serves as the board director with the American Planning Association Illinois Chapter, Public Narrative, and Territory Chicago, and founder of Al Raby Foundation. She is an alum of AmeriCorps, Vista, and City Year. Katanya is committed to planning for equity, providing service to underserved communities, and encouraging youth to consider their roles in the future of their own communities. Welcome, Katanya. Next, we have Barbara Stubblefield, Senior Manager, Community Outreach at Ardmore Roderick. She has nearly 30 years of public relations experience, community outreach, community service, strategic planning, project management, public communications, government, and community affairs experience. Barbara is responsible for creating an outreach and workforce development plan for the CTA RLE program. Her equity quote, "If I do not have the basic items I need to sustain my own viability and that of my family, not as a result of my not trying, but due to systematic forces systemic forces who see me as less than I am a victim of inequity, close quote. Welcome, Barbara. Next, we have Jacky Grimshaw, Vice President for Governmental Affairs for the Center for Network Technology. Jacky joined CNT in 1992 and has since developed its capacity to engage in public policy advocacy, transportation research, public participation, tool development, GIS mapping, and community economic development. Jacky created and led CNT's transportation and air quality programs for over a decade and currently co-leads the Transportation Equity Network, which is a coalition of community-based organizations, civic organizations, and representatives from academic institutions focused on working with decision makers to embed racial equity and mobility justice into transportation via community-driven decisions and investments. She is a founding member of Elevated Chicago, a collaborative which presents community-led solutions to neighborhood displacement and inequities using an underutilized asset, our public transportation system. Welcome, Jacky. And last but not least, our moderator, Ms. Tracey Bailey, owner and president of BSquared Consulting Group, LLC, brings over 25 years of experience working with various public and private stakeholders in the transportation and construction industries, from providing customized workforce and business services to public, private, nonprofit business, to developing policy and programs to address the needs of the most vulnerable populations. Tracey has helped businesses and individuals win. As a former leader in the Illinois Tollways Diversity and Strategic Development Department and a firsthand witness to the disparities in the industry, Tracey has established BSquared Consulting Group, LLC, on the premise of leveling the playing field for all businesses and workers using laser-focused, solution-based strategy. Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity. And I pass this along to Tracey. Hi, Tracey.
Hi, Paul. Thanks so much for the glowing introduction. And it's a pleasure to be amongst this amazing panel to facilitate this conversation. So today we will talk about equity in transportation. Whenever I'm faced with a topic, I like to go and do research and preparation to have an informative discussion. The first place that I typically go would be see my old friend Merriam-Webster, to look up and define equity. So when I checked out the Webster website, I found that equity was defined as justice according to natural law or rights, specifically freedom from bias or favoritism. That's what Merriam-Webster had to say about equity. So let's replace that word equity with specifically freedom from bias or favoritism in transportation. Okay, so with that said, bias and favoritism and equity, transportation is the conversation we'll have. Further research says that equity in transportation refers to the distribution of impacts, benefits, and costs, and whether they are considered appropriate. In the conversation that we have today, we hope to address many facets of what equity means in transportation from a community perspective. How to meaningful incorporate equity into private and public sector transportation of innovations is a topic we should cover with the vast experience we have here. I'm contextualizing the conversation based on the amazing panel that we have here. What can be done to narrow the mobility gap? Hopefully we will discuss some factors that will address the gaps in for mobility in marginalized communities. Policy and advocacy that's necessary to impact and affect change when it comes to equity and transportation from a community perspective, and community involvement and participation in planning. So with that said, I won't delay any further. I'll start with our first panel guest here. We hope to have more of a conversation. I'll let you know, please, if you have any questions, to put it in the Q&A session of the Zoom, And at the end of the presentation, we'll return to the Q&A session. So without any further ado, I'd like to start with our first panelist today, Ms. Katanya Raby. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Tracy. It's really great to be here. Thanks everyone for attending. I guess I could start by just sharing my overall experience in community engagement. Spans a lot of different areas outside of transportation. I've been very much involved with our regional comprehensive plan and the engagement around Onto 2050 through the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning when I was working there. And that was a 3-year process for engagement. I've also done a lot of community level planning, some tactical urbanism, some really connecting with artists and communities to really kind of set the stage for opportunities for public artwork. And then also one really important thing for me when it comes to equity is really connecting with our young people on these plan developments or any planning work. Really making sure that their voices are incorporated into the work that's being done, because they're ultimately going to be the ones that are going to be experiencing and living and thriving once those plans are actually completed. 30 years from now, I will not likely be the one that will be enjoying the things that I'm working on, especially when it comes to larger regional comprehensive plans. So those are some of the areas that I've touched. Just to give a little bit more info on some of the projects that I've worked on. So when back at CMAP, I did, like I was saying, I did a lot of work when it came to our regional comprehensive plan Onto 2050. And of course, that plan really covered the whole gamut. When it came to transportation, my focus was a lot more on the public transportation side of things and how people were connecting across the entire region. How people were connecting to jobs, connecting to opportunities. We did an extensive study on, helping people to connect from what we found to be economically disadvantaged areas that did not have as many public, access to public transit, and how we could really start putting more emphasis on those areas so that the funding was streamed to those areas where the transit was lacking. And that work continued into my work with the city of Chicago on the equitable transit-oriented development plan, which was actually approved by the plan development, sorry, I'm blanking, I'm freaking out. It was approved today in the commissioner, the planning commission, which is really exciting. It's a huge, step for that policy plan, so that the city now has a framework to work within, so that new transit-oriented developments will actually follow the recommendations that have been outlined in that development. So I worked with that team on that project for over a year, plus some actually before I came on board to the mayor's office. And Jacky Grimshaw, of course, had a large hand in that as well with her work with Elevated Chicago. So those are some really great areas where I had an opportunity to work directly with communities. And of course, over the last year, the engagement specifically for the ETOD plan was restricted to online engagement due to COVID. So that was a shift that all of us who have specialized in community engagement had to really get used to. And trying to figure out how to creatively connect with communities online, especially those communities that are traditionally harder to reach anyway in person, when there's a technological divide, that's something that we had to figure out how to overcome. But we were able to connect with a wide variety of stakeholders across the entire city, especially through the networks that have been established through Elevated Chicago. And so that partnership between the mayor's office and Elevated really made that process for engagement, really fruitful, and helped it get to the point where now it's an actual, policy that, has teeth, and can really move some things forward in terms of equitable public transit. Some other projects that I've done, again, back to the youth and making sure that youth have that space at these tables, include, just helping them to understand the importance of, what it means to have a walkable community, what it means to be able to get around and multimodal, bike riding and walking and all of these different modes of transportation, and why it's important for us to really make sure that the infrastructure is there and that the communities that have been disinvested are the ones that are at the forefront to receive the funding to continue to build on those things. Currently, I am at Far South CDC, and we are working on a couple of things. So at the Roseland Medical District, it's about a half-mile corridor at 111th between Stewart and Michigan, South Michigan Avenue. And this is an area where we're looking to incorporate more opportunities to connect with transit, especially along because of the proposed Red Line Extension that will be stopping at 111th Street. We really wanted to take advantage of the opportunity to continue to build around that area, looking at economic development opportunities and housing, and then also really beefing up the medical district, which has the same designation as the Illinois Medical District, but just has not been seen as such. So, those are some pretty great projects that are coming to the Far South Side. And, it's all about trying to move that funding and that energy that's been primarily on the north and the northwest sides of the city to the south and the south and the west sides, so that we all can have great access to our really amazing public transit system and connect people to jobs and opportunities. So with that, I will pass it over to Lynda.
Katanya. Yeah, I guess I'll start off with, telling you a little bit about how I got involved with transportation equity work. I guess one of the first seeds was in high school. I think fittingly, I went after Katanya. She supported the Future Leaders in Planning program with the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, and I was part of the inaugural cohort in high school. So I think our legacies in this work have sort of connected in the last few years. So that was kind of my first start with kind of getting a sense about urban planning and the different equity issues. Being in that program that was exposing high school students to a lot of different planning issues, which is a rarity. A rarity with like young people, I would say. You don't really hear that term urban planning until like specialized college classes. So I got some exposure early on. And I think that was definitely one of the seeds to the work that I do now. I think another seed was when I was involved with anti-displacement work in Logan Square, Humboldt Park. When I graduated college, I was involved with a lot of community groups talking about different displacement pressures, and a lot of it seemed to be related to transportation equity and mobility as well. So I think my lens just got a lot deeper in terms of how does transportation fit into all these other issues that we see play out in neighborhoods. And and I think that kind of really made me think a lot more about what the work could look like to actually address a lot of the racial inequities that I see. So the work that I was doing was around like addressing some of the issues of displacement around the 606 trail, which opened in 2015, which is an elevated 2.7 mile trail that residents had been asking for a long time. And kind of became a vehicle for elevated housing prices. And a lot of people are concerned and are concerned about, like how it's related to continuing to gentrify certain parts of the city. And in addition to that, in Logan Square, there was a lot of conversation around transit-oriented development. Around 5 to 6 years ago, it really sped up. And yeah, a lot of people were also worried about, how is this gonna also lead to displacement of families? And I think that really made me think that you can talk about transportation equity, but there's a lot more you need to consider. It just because housing is next to a train station doesn't mean it's automatically equitable. There's a lot more to think about that. And I mean, ironically, when I first started to learn about TOD, I saw it as like a negative because I saw that they were all really luxury market rate apartments, and saw that low-income families were being displaced from buildings that were being demolished to have these high-rise buildings on Milwaukee Avenue. So there was just a lot more context that informed how I viewed these projects as actually equitable. So I think that context has really informed my work. And after doing some organizing, I started to write more about these issues with online website, writing about transportation and biking, and how that related to also all these other issues that I'm mentioning, like housing displacement. And I think after writing for a while, kind of started to more formally get involved with like advocacy work. So as they mentioned in my my intro, I co-authored a report a couple years ago around transportation, like fair equity in the region with Active Transportation Alliance. So that was one of my major projects in the last few years. And in addition to that, with not being with the Active Transportation Alliance, I've become a part of the Transportation Equity Network. So I'm a co-chair for that. And that started about a year and a half ago alongside Jacky Grimshaw and Obai Reed. So that was kind of a collective that came about trying to create some sort of new entity where people could, like community groups could come together to talk about what transportation equity could look like in neighborhoods across the city. Because there hasn't really been anything that is specific to transportation equity and also like broad enough that it's encompassing a lot of different issues in that. I think we've seen like there's specific things around like trains or transit-oriented development or biking, but we want it to be a holistic group that could maybe inform how government processes are helping to inform policies that we're seeing and how they actually play out in neighborhoods, and how that also plays out into what kind of mobility we see in neighborhoods across the city. So that's a little bit about my work. I think I've just been trying to figure out how to inform, particularly through the Transportation Equity Network, how city processes either perpetuate inequities or can help address and potentially see some good changes in our communities, particularly Black and Brown neighborhoods that have seen disinvestment. So I think I'll leave it at that for now, and I'll pass it on to Barbara.
Thank you, Lynda. I appreciate that. And I am Barbara Stubblefield, and let me start off with take a little bit of licensure here. I see my former baby sister, Elizabeth Carmignani here, so it's good to see a person's name I notice. I am a Southsider, far Southsider. I grew up in the Morgan Park community, and we always took transit. So I as far back as I can remember, we took transportation all around where we were going. How I really got involved in transit, though, is I am also a former bus operator for the Chicago Transit Authority. And I drove out of the now shuttered Archer Garage. But I mention Archer Garage because I worked at that garage just before the Orange Line was built. And so I watched and provided service that was called express service. The express service had bus bunching before bus bunching became an issue. literally provided the residents of the Archer Heights, Brighton Park, McKinley Park communities with a 1-seat ride into the loop. And I provided that 1-seat ride. And that began to kind of twist my wheels about, wow, this is express service, which I had not seen in my community. When I would utilize the service in my community, I would either walk 3 blocks to a bus, take the bus, transfer again, take another bus to the 95th Street station. And I did this for years, even through college. When I established my own home, I looked to be close to transit because I saw transit as a part of my everyday commute. But where I would catch one piece or one mode of transportation, some other residents did not have that luxury. And when we start to talk about this transit equity, I see this as like Lynda sees it. I see it as more than just having access to a bus a mile or less, or rapid transit a mile or less, or commuter a mile or less. I also see walkability. I also see infrastructure. Are the sidewalks to the point where you can walk? I'm looking at divvy bikes that pop up in neighborhoods. Currently I live on the southwest side. There are no divvy bikes in my backyard. I'm looking at scooters. I'm looking at how far do I have to go to get on a form of any type of transportation. So equity to me is just so much more. And as Paul mentioned, my statement, if the things that I need to sustain my livability are missing, then I am a victim of inequality. And so I'm hoping that today that we skip down this road and talk about all of the things that keeps our communities from being equitable. If I don't have a bodega, I don't have a coffee shop, I don't have a bookstore, I don't have a mom and pop shop that may provide fresh fruit and vegetables, or I don't have a big store where I can get daily sundries. So all of these to me translate into inequity. But also let me say briefly how I even got started in community affairs. I used to work for a state senator, and constituent services was really, really important. And because I lived in the district that I worked, I was always the one that engaged with the constituents. And when I left there, I found my way back to CTA and got into government and community relations, where I had an entire area that I was responsible for. And I loved it because, one, it was the first time that the authority had split up its service area. And so I had the entire South Side. But also the authority I saw was moving toward the purposeful, intentional engagement with communities. It was no longer just okay to go in and, people go to bed and they wake up and, there's some new sign in their backyard. Thoroughly enjoy being able to go into a community and hopefully help a community engage and speak up and speak about those things that they need for their community to be so that they can thrive and sustain. So I'm not going to take up all the time because I know that we are on a time limit, but that's my story. And I end my story with, I'm back at CTA, but as a consultant on the Red Line Extension. And truly am I excited about the prospects of the Red Line Extension, because you heard me say, I grew up on the South Side, far South Side. And I took the Red Line, which is back in the day, I'm telling my age, was the Lake Dan Ryan, most of my early adult and youth. And so to see the prospects of what this extension could mean for those on the far south side, in the community that I shopped in growing up, that I went to high school in, is limitless. And again, CTA, and I'm proud to be a part of this team, is intentional and purposeful about the type of outreach to this heavily disinvested, purposely disinvested community. So I'm truly excited, and I thank WTS for even asking me to join you all today. And Katanya, 30 years from now, I'm going to be 87. I'm probably not going to be on any transit. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Jacky. Jacky.
I'm coming. I had to, one would think after 15 months, I would be an expert at switching from mute and off video to being unmuted and on video. So, so we can keep moving the program forward. I want to just start with kind of like what got me into transportation advocacy and into transportation equity itself. And that, for me, transportation equity became clear from my life experiences. Now, Barbara, you're talking about the Dan Ryan Red Line. Well, see, when I was a kid, the Dan Ryan was being laid out. And the folks in my community learned about, you know, this alignment, this new highway coming through from stakes in the ground with orange flags tied to them. You know, there wasn't any kind of community engagement, community notification, community awareness that we were about to have this new highway. My classmates in school that lived in that area found out that the highway was coming when they got notices from their landlord that they had to move, that the buildings were being, the buildings are being demolished, that they were coming down. And so that was very disruptive to the kids in school. Some of them had to move out of the neighborhood, so they were no longer in school anymore. And for others, they had a more difficult time getting to school. They weren't always on time. And so that whole
Jacky, you've frozen. Sometimes it helps if you stop your video and start it again. Okay, well, we're going to keep it moving. When Jacky is able to get reconnected with us, we'll definitely interested to hear in the rest of what she was saying. What amazing conversation thus far, and listening to you all tell your stories and what have you. It looks as if Jacky is logging out and will log back in. So until then, instead of telling a couple jokes, which I suck at, if I can get the panel temporarily to join me back via video, we can have some brief conversation, and we'll pick back up when Jacky returns. First and foremost, amazing. The information I've received thus far, there's so much to chew on. It's like, where do we actually start? I'm Barbara. I'm accustomed to hearing Barb from around the tollway. But Barbara, if you ever walk away from this transportation and this community advocacy thing, you have a career in voiceover work or in speaking. Number one, you have a future in that if you ever decide that, the fight gets a little bit daunting at times. So there's a lot of things that I heard while you guys were speaking. A lot of things. I heard equity, and then in the same sentence, I heard equity and I heard gentrification, right? So I heard that in the same sentence. And what resonated with me when I heard those two things mentioned together is that if there's equity in transportation, when we're looking from the community perspective, does that mean that the community is gentrifying? I mean, does equity speak to gentrification? Any one of you guys could jump in there. It's just a question that I was thinking about when you guys are speaking. So we'll start off with Barbara, if you don't mind.
How did I know you were going to pick me first? But Lynda raised, and Lynda, you got to come off of mute because you sparked a memory in me. When I was at the authority the second time in government and community relations, we used to go to the CHA charrettes when they were tearing down all of the housing projects. And, you know, City of Chicago had probably some of the most nefarious housing projects, especially on the State Street Strip. And something you said about the buildings being torn down, but it wasn't for the people who lived there, but for those who were kind of being moved out. And I remember going to charrettes, and I let me be brutally honest here, I would get in my vehicle and cry because the people were so afraid of what was coming next. And I had overheard some of the people that was running the charrettes say to the residents that they, in order to go to the new home, wherever that was, and it was not one-for-one replacement, but that they had to go to class so that they could engage with their new neighbors. And that broke my heart. And recognize at that moment that inequality in housing was so pervasive because these people just happen to have to live in a low-income housing. So you sparked it, Lynda, and that is why a lot of people literally equate we're getting all of this infrastructure. That means we're about to be displaced. This is not a home for us. It's going to be a home for those who are seen as more affluent. And for our purposes, and to be quite honest, when people say more affluent, they begin to think white. And when they think of a lower income, they think of people of color, Black and brown. But I have to even dare submit, Lynda, that even the Black and brown people also subscribe to some of these same notions.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Sorry, I was just gonna respond briefly. Yeah, I think it's really complicated. I think the longer I'm doing transportation equity work, I think the more complex my ideas get. I think when I was purely doing like anti-displacement work, it was very much like I think there's a clear good and a bad, at least in my mind. And I think there's just so much nuance in terms of like we want good things for communities. At the same time, a lot of quote unquote good things have negative connotations for people that are living there. And I think the longer I do this work, the clearer it is that I think we need to figure out a way to address a lot of different issues within the work that goes beyond transportation. I think if we're solely talking about transportation, we're missing a lot of context because there's so much more than, oh, a community needs a train station. Well, there's a lot more that's going to go into that conversation. And yeah, a lot of people are going to be suspicious. I think Chicago historically, there's, especially in Black and brown neighborhoods, when you get new things, it historically hasn't meant that the people there are able to enjoy it long term. And I think it's very much acute with like Black neighborhoods in particular, when we saw everything that's happened with housing and public housing and how people have been displaced. And like Cabrini Green, just thinking about how much it's changed. There's just a lot of examples that I can think about in terms of neighborhoods that have changed and quote unquote really nice now, and accessible to trains and just better infrastructure for like living a life, and we see who's able to enjoy them. there's just a lot of distrust, and I don't know how to grapple with that sometimes. It's very challenging.
I think we grapple with the distrust one piece at a time. But I also recognize that people have a level of distrust when they continuously see the same thing over and over and over again. And so for us as people who do outreach, it is really incumbent upon us to ensure that it's not the same thing, different day. I almost said something different, y'all, my apologies. But that it's just not the same thing. What works here doesn't necessarily work there. And you got to be prepared to pivot.
I like that last point you had there, Barbara, where what works here doesn't necessarily work there. Just thinking about displacement, because there's different types of displacement. And you got the displacement that leads to gentrification, but then you got displacement that is due to, this great exodus of people from the city. And that's because there's the lack of connection to opportunity. And people are people want to grow, people want to have opportunities to own their own homes. But what steps are being put in place to help make those connections for folks? Part of that being our transportation system. Not everybody can afford a car. Not everybody, I think about, I'm a South Sider. I've been on the South Side my whole life. And everything that I do requires a car for the most part. And it's not that, I'm a huge transit supporter, obviously, but it's not that I don't enjoy public transit. Part of the issue is that it takes so long to get to the grocery store on public transit, or to drop my kids off at school, or, do whatever it is that I'm trying to do. It's just easier to have a car. I'm fortunate enough to have one, but just think of the countless families that are not. And, the city is not exactly the most affordable city to live in when you have to live so far away from transit, and you're paying, your rent. And then on top of that, you're paying for a car and all of the things that come along with owning a car. So, those are, just those inequities ring loud and clear, that they're, and not just distance from one thing to another. There's also concerns around safety, or the perception of safety on the South and West sides. I know for sure part of my reason for driving a car is because how I personally want to feel safer by not walking down to where my closest bus stop was. I live near the Red Line, but if I'm going out at night, I'm not taking the Red Line. If I lived up north, that might be an option, but I just don't feel comfortable walking from the Red Line to my house late at night. So these are other, things that we have to consider when we're thinking about communities and the differences between the communities and what they're experiencing when it comes to equity in transit.
Okay, thank you so very much. Switch gears a little bit. I have a question. When you're talking about infrastructure, or you're talking about transportation and equity in communities, in the planning phase, the educational component for the communities that are involved, is that happening, or is more of that needed to know, are the right people at the table? And I don't mean the developer and the public official and people of that nature, but the actual community residents in the town hall meetings and in the community meetings when they're talking about the plans that are coming. Is that at that stage, is it too late, or is that the appropriate time to engage the people that it really will affect in the communities when you're talking about planning for any transportation needs in said communities? And if that is the case, the educational component that is utilized, that we're using to educate our communities on exactly how to navigate that. We'll start off with Katanya this time. I'm sorry, or anyone who wants to speak. I hate to put people on the spot, so if anyone else wants to speak, that'd be great.
It's fine. I can speak to this a bit. With my involvement with Elevated Chicago, I will say that that's one group that is really, really pushing to make sure that there's representation across all community areas, in regards to transportation equity. And they're doing it in such a way that, and I've been in community engagement for a while, and a lot of the things that they do is not necessarily what you would see when it comes to the planning process, the way that they think about it, the way that they really are super intentional about infusing equity across the entire process, and really trying to dig deep in these communities to find, pull people in as they can. It is, the city is large, so it's hard to get almost 3 billion people to participate in anything. But I think that when the process is one that is where the leadership is turned over to the community itself, I think that's when you'll garner more results. You have to relinquish that. And I think, now planning is kind of moving into that space where they're realizing, oh yeah, we should let the communities lead these efforts and lead the charrettes, and, kind of bring people in to the fold. Because otherwise, it's going to be looked at as like there's this official thing that has nothing to do with me. But then when the plan is actually completed, then it's like, wait, where was I? Why wasn't I involved? So like you have to have, those community leaders, those boots on the ground who are going to pull folks in. And I think Elevated Chicago has been doing a really great job at identifying those folks and really trying to intentionally make sure that that is the process moving forward for all of their work. And they've taught the city a lot. When I was in the mayor's office, it was a process to get the ETLD plan off the ground and make sure that we were really connecting with communities, especially during the time of COVID. But I think that we did a pretty good job considering how the city is, known to not be as connected to communities in the past. So.
Sorry, thank you so much. Any other comments?
Yeah, I was definitely gonna echo what Katanya was saying around engaging groups on the ground. I think that's really important to actually have inclusivity and to kind of develop a plan that's going to reflect the needs of the community. I think one other question that I think about in terms of like when I think about community engagement is how to also develop processes that you're getting a product that's exciting to people at the end, that's not taking a decade to come to fruition. And I think that's something that I struggle with sometimes, thinking about the number of plans that exist in Chicago that have just sat there for a long time. And we can say a decade later, nothing's really changed, nothing's really been implemented. So I think that's something I've been trying to also think about. How do we engage like people in processes that they feel invested in, and they also feel that this is going to lead to changes. It's not just going to be me informing a plan that isn't going to lead to changes in my community. So I think that's something that I also want to think about implementation also in like the planning process for developing ideas. And I think Elevated was a really good example. I think they've been doing a lot of good work around really trying to think about what like actual equitable transit oriented development looks like, and looks like develop tangible changes to the city in terms of how it goes about approving like TOD. So I think that's something also important, like thinking about like end results and how it's gonna have significance, and not just engaging people in something that's not going to lead to changes in our communities. And I think there are some good examples recently. I think of Emmett Street in Logan Square, that the 100% 100 unit TOD project right next to the Logan Square Blue Line. I think that's a really good example of transportation equity and housing justice. And I think we need more of those examples. And I think that plan itself, it was like five years in the making, maybe more. And how can we develop processes that are inclusive, but also facilitating the approval for certain things that are actually going to do a lot of good for communities. And yeah, so I think I'm like sometimes think a lot about in-depth processes, but also how can the city facilitate things not taking a very, very long time and all that engagement. So yeah, so I think there's like a few things that I'm trying to also unpack in terms of how to do good engagement that's like meaningful for people.
Thank
I think
you,
it's
Lynda.
important. I was just gonna say one thing to Lynda, like it's important to have those champions in those communities that are going to be the ones that are going to push it. I think Emmett Street is such a grassroots effort that the city wouldn't have been moved in that way if there weren't those leaders like really pushing it. And I think that comes with educating folks, like really helping folks to understand why ETOD or just equity in transit overall is important. And when it comes to ETOD specifically, helping them to understand why density is important, how this is not a bad thing for your community, like helping them to understand all of those factors. So yeah, if you've got the champions, either they're going to be the ones, barking the loudest, and the city won't be able to ignore that.
And let me add one little caveat to it. And we talked about it, and I don't think that we can overemphasize, and it's really meeting people where they are, recognizing that what works for Katanya does not work for Barbara. But we're going to find some commonality somewhere, but I'm not going to get everything, and Katanya's not going to get everything. So it's that champion. And I'm a former lobbyist, so a champion is crucial, because a champion carries your bill and make sure that it comes from one house and goes to the other form of the legislature. So I'm a big fan of a champion, and there's no better champion than somebody who lives in the community that's going to be impacted by whatever infrastructure project is coming that way. And Lynda, I agree with you 100%. 20, 30, 40, 50 years is a long time.
It is.
And then the apathy that our community and that the residents start to get is quite understandable. Can't be upset by it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for helping us fill in the time. Welcome back, Miss Jacky. We missed you. We're gonna go ahead and turn it back over to you so you can finish your presentation. Yes.
Yeah, I am so sorry about that. I had a power failure, and then of course my computer decided it had to update. So I had to go through all of that all over the place. So I do apologize, everybody. So I'm not sure how much time we have left. I don't want to take up too much time. The point I was just trying to make was how I got into advocacy. And it started from, the building of the Dan Ryan and what it did to my friends and classmates. And that turned me into an advocate. I didn't know it at the time, but as I progressed through my career, I saw more and more of these inequities that were taking place all over the place. Lynda mentioned transit-oriented development. Well, Chicago was built as a naturally occurring transit-oriented development, and we got out of that kind of building as we got into the super expressways and the highways and away from transit, so that the automobile became king and not transit. And as a result, that kind of living and using the train and using transit, you're talking about trains. I remember streetcars, which, were great ways to get around the city. So you had buses, streetcars, and trains. But again, the streetcars were replaced by buses as the new modern kind of transportation, and then the cars replaced the buses, right? So we've had this evolution of different transportation vehicles that impacted the way we lived and the way development happened and so forth. And so as my career progressed, I started to join up with advocates in other parts of the country who are experiencing the same kinds of things that I experienced, either through being displaced because of transportation projects, or were gentrified out of communities because those new high expensive TODs that Lynda mentioned were coming into vogue. And that, we started then to see the impact of the transportation on the quality of life in terms of the air quality. And I was trained as a scientist, and all that bio that came out at the beginning. Really, I'm a scientist at heart. My majors are biology and chemistry and undergraduate. And so looking and understanding, the chemistry that was going on in the air and what that was doing to our bodies, our physical health, how that was being affected, that all of that started to, talk about intersectionality. Yeah, I was living that and working on that before that became a term of art. And so, by joining with other advocates throughout the country, it became clear that by using our collective voices, that turned me into an organizer. So that became my second career as an organizer, bringing together disparate voices, working on common goals in a collective manner. And by doing that, you really can affect change. And so change making is really what we're trying to do with TIN and the Transportation Equity Network, is bring collective voices together to see if we cannot start creating some systemic change in the way that transportation decision makers make decisions, how the community is incorporated into that decision-making process, so that we have transportation projects that benefit communities, that allow them to get access to things that will improve their quality of life, to get access to jobs, to education, to healthcare, to be able to visit friends, to recreate, that transportation projects are creating safer communities, not creating unsafe communities by having cars go through without concern about speed limits or pedestrians or cyclists or any of the rest of that. So anyway, in a great big hurry of fashion, that's who I am. That's how I got to this, and that's what I'm trying to accomplish. So I will take any questions, or if you want me to fill in some more, I can fill in some more, but that's it in a nutshell.
What's absolutely amazing, Miss Jacky, is that you had a power outage as well as your computer had to reboot, and it was like you were present for the entire conversation, because everything you just touched on was the conversation we were having when you weren't even connected. So that is absolutely amazing to me. Thank you so much. We have a couple questions in the Q&A box, and I'll start to read them off for you all, and someone can jump in. I hate to be the school teacher to say it's your turn or it's your turn. So whomever feel they want to address the question first, please feel free to. So the first question would be from Kimberly Slaughter. And her question is, why can't the engagement with the communities be a partnership with the agencies? If the process is only led by the community, the process is still not developing collaboration and respect that would still reinforce an us and them mentality. I think that we can create a process of mutual respect if we all work together. So, any takers?
I think that's what I just said. I think I answered the question before she asked it. But yes, absolutely. That it does need to be a partnership. The agencies have the funds, right? And a lot of times they have the mandates from either the feds or the state or locally. So there are some limitations on what they can do, but it's all about how do you deliver projects in the community. And so if you're going to be providing projects in the community, you want to hear from the community, so you may decide as a transportation agency that you want to put a stop sign there. Well, me living in the community and watching all the crashes that happen outside my door, I would say a stop sign is not adequate enough. that we need to have instead a stop light so that we have a traffic control device. And so, like when Secretary Slaughter was head of the U.S. Department of Transportation, we had this running conversation that's almost kind of like a mantra between the two of us. And that is, the best transportation planners are the ones that use this transportation system. So that if you are going to start talking about planning for communities, you got to have those folks who are using that transportation system because they know better. They know where the bottlenecks are. They know where the unsafe crosswalks are. They know where the speed traps, the speed limits are inadequate. Yeah, inadequate. I was Lakeshore Drive. Somebody was talking about a crash on Lakeshore Drive, and the design speed of Lakeshore Drive is one thing, and the posted speed limit is another. The posted speed limit says 45. It is design speed of 60, right? So that is a great big disconnect in terms of decision-making and what's safe, right? 60 miles an hour Lakeshore Drive is not safe. And, just today, there was a car that must have been going 90 down Lakeshore Drive, but it's built like an interstate highway kind of design. And so people are gonna use it like an interstate highway when it's not, it's a boulevard. But anyway, I'll let somebody else answer.
But Jacky, let me piggyback on what you said. And hey, Kim, thank you. Also, when people in communities aren't seeing anybody that look like them or even are from their neighborhood, I get a little bit of entree, or I call it a hall pass, because I am a far South Sider. I grew up in the Morgan Park community, which is just west of Roseland. I shopped in Roseland. So when I'm talking to people in the community and they find out, oh, she's one of the kids, from the block. And so that gives you a little bit of an entree. But when people start to see individuals that, and I'm not even talking racial, that this kid didn't come from here. This kid doesn't even recognize what we have been impacted by. It literally makes it a little more difficult. I kind of call it and I hope nobody gets offended by this, but I kind of call it the Tarzan. And I'm not sure how many people watched Tarzan growing up. Jacky, we might have watched that show. And so Tarzan was the be all and end all in the native country, and the people who had been there forever and had already eked out a living, knew. But of course, Tarzan knew it all. But Tarzan wasn't from there. I digress.
That was a great, Jacky. And I did watch Tarzan. I am in that group that watched Tarzan when it was actually on television. So that was a great analogy. I'll go on to the second question if no one else has any comments for the first one. This one is from Katie Bell. COVID-19 has strongly increased the prevalence of virtual public involvement activities for transportation projects. As the state moves back toward being able to host in-person meetings again, do you feel a virtual component should continue to be offered?
I'll speak to that only because I am in the process of designing that type of engagement right now. But I think that, yes, there's a level of comfort. I mean, we're just now getting out of this thing. And what does that really mean? Like, I have questions, but I won't use this platform to ask. But I think that we definitely have to provide virtual options for folks. And I think that it should be high quality virtual. It shouldn't be just, camera tuned into whatever is happening in the live version of this. It should also be this component that allows people to fully engage. There should be, some type of two-way communication option in whatever that process is. It's not easy, but COVID did help us to kind of break that barrier and realize that it's doable. And so we have to continue to be creative and figure out how to make sure that we are connecting to our virtual audiences in a way that is meaningful and we'll keep them, you know, involved in the process, just like we would with those who are in person.
And I think we also have to keep in mind, though, the audience again, because if we have the inequity in technology and the access to that technology that allows the resident to participate, I am all for a hybrid. I have noticed in some of the philanthropic organizations that I belong to, the numbers of people who come to the meeting have increased exponentially. That's because they don't have to get dressed, you know, from the waist down. You know, they don't have to get dressed. They don't have to go anywhere. I mean, let's just
Are
be
you
honest.
in my house, Barbara?
See, Tracey, I wasn't gonna call you out. But yeah, so people had a freedom of not having to leave their home. And, you know, we kind of come a little full circle, and maybe they didn't even have the transportation to go to where the meeting maybe or would have been. So this inclusion of having to pivot because of COVID has really fascinated everyone. I know we all a little zoomed out, but I like a hybrid option.
Yes,
and I think
absolutely.
it's something we should continue, you know.
Absolutely. Especially if we're talking about there are some gaps in mobility among some communities. So, I mean, it only makes sense that the technological ability to and most all have a mobile device in some way, shape, or form. So that is a manner to stay involved, stay connected, and be present when otherwise physically you may not be able to. I have another question. Lynda, you had something? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to add briefly to Barbara's comment around like transportation being an impediment for people meeting in person, like engaging in community meetings. And it's something we talked about at the Active Transportation Alliance recently. How our community meetings going to look like after the, I don't know, quote unquote post-pandemic world. And I think especially some of the staff members that do a lot of suburban work, they said that, yeah, this is very unusual that we're able to have a lot of people from all across the region join into a meeting around like suburban advocacy, for example, because people don't have to leave their homes. And when we think about how transportation inequities play out throughout the region and the suburbs and how there's even less access to transit, I think the hybrid model becomes, I think, even more essential to continue if we actually want to include people in these conversations, people in even certain parts of Chicago that, yeah, don't really have ready access to transit service. So I think it's going to be really important to, I don't know, continue that even as we, quote unquote, go back to normal. We can, in person, I think is important too, but also I think in general, just giving a diverse array of options for people to keep engaging.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So we are coming close to our time, but I have two questions. I'll try to get both of them in. 6:15, I believe. We have to turn it back over to Dawana. So I want to make sure that all the questions are answered to the best of our ability. So I'll go right into the next one, the Cherry Cooper. This is should be interesting. What role, if any, should the transportation industry play in social issues, i.e. Black Lives Matter, Protect Asians movement? Also, have you seen any cities do a good job at this? If so, please share examples. And I'll give you the second one too, if you guys can hold on to that one. How can we include the youth in DEI conversations related to the transportation industry? I've observed that a lot of transportation agencies have not thought about how to creatively engage the youth and make messaging more relatable to them. I know, Katanya, you had touched bases on definitely engaging the youth before. So the social movements and the effect, as well as engaging the youth. So the two things that's on the table. And now,
Don't start calling people out. I'm gonna save you from that.
Thank you. I'm calling you.
Yeah, but you know, Lynda, and I made a note, no, it was Katanya said, you know, 30 years from now. And so 30 years from now, honestly, I will be 87 years old, God willing. And so the projects that I see, the infrastructure projects and the equity belong to the youth. And I really feel that they should be the drivers. They should be in the driver's seat. I should be in the middle of the bus. And on my way exiting out the rear door as they are moving this to be what they need it to be. Again, so we're back to that, you know, meeting people where they are. But our youth is really our drivers. And when I was growing up, people poured into me. And so I think it is incumbent on us to pour into the youth. I am a mentor to 5 people. 3 of them, I got them because 2 friends said, she'll help you out. And so I believe that we should all be pouring into our tomorrows and lay that groundwork. Because if we don't, then who is? And if not now, when?
Thank you, Barbara.
Yeah, I definitely agree there. I want to say that today was such a great day in the Plan Commission meeting, where the ETOD policy plan got accepted by the commission. And there were so many young people who showed up to talk about how this policy will impact their communities. That in itself speaks volumes to what the future of this document means to the city, because these young people are the ones that are going to make sure that the city is being held accountable to doing what they're supposed to do in terms of creating equity around transit. And I think that inviting them to these tables and helping them to understand that they are supposed, like they have space there, like they should be there is the thing. Like we have to, so like Barbara was saying, you know, we have to be the ones that kind of, you know, give them that push and give them that encouragement to be part of this and help them to understand what it means. Lynda and I have talked about, you know, how long it takes for people to really learn what planning means. I mean, I didn't learn what planning was until I was a junior in college. And then I was like, the light bulbs went off. I was like, that's what I want to do. You know, so I just think about how long it took me. Had I known about this earlier in my life, you know, I could have been involved much sooner as a young person and really, you know, joining in on causes that meant something to me because I would have understood the process. And so this also, you know, ties into our education system and like how our educators are helping our young people to understand their position in the process and their civic duties and all of that. Like there's just so much that our young people aren't being taught. But I don't want to say that, but I think that there needs to be more of an emphasis on them understanding their place in their community. It's not just to, you know, live there, but it's actually to be part of it and to lead it and to, you know, help bring those good things to the area and make those changes in the way that they see fit, because they're the ones that are going to be, you know, looked to continue to lead those efforts in 15, 20 years.
So we have to pour into our youth, is what I heard. We have to help them develop their voice and understanding in this space and then empower them to go forth and push.
And I see that Nicole put in there, you know, we can't forget those in the middle of your careers or made a late change. Oh, absolutely not. Sometimes when you become one of the kind of the senior members of a team, you pour into them and they pour into you likewise. So, you know, the people who are in the middle of the careers, the youth do glean from us. And likewise, we glean those ideas and ideologies or even a difference of opinion from them. So, Nicole, it's going to swing both ways. It's a pendulum.
Absolutely. Miss Jacky?
Yeah, no, I was going to say that, Barbara was talking about her informal mentoring, but I think we also have to look at how we can structure programs so that young people can learn. For example, one of the board members on Equiticity, which is Obai's organization, our other co-chair for the Transportation Equity Network, she's created really an infrastructure training program that she kind of premiered it and in one of the Washington DC schools. Was such a success. She came here, Dorval Carter welcomed her in and had her join her program with the summer interns that the CTA has every year. And it goes in terms of infrastructure, not just transportation infrastructure, but water and housing as well. And so we have these wonderful students that last year that we had to do virtually. I mean, we had this wonderful program that was designed that, of course, things change, you have to be adaptable. So we were, but hopefully, we'll be able to bring it back again and engage more high school. And these were high school students so that they are interested in careers and they'll know about infrastructure careers before they get to a junior in college. Katanya, so that we are building for the future. But I just want to say one thing about the social unrest. I was trying to think as the program was moving about, from all of the organizations that I've been involved with throughout the country, was there a positive example of transportation agencies assisting with that? And I swear I can't think of one. I can think of the opposite in terms of where decisions were made that hindered the support for Black Lives Matter and so forth. But I can't think of any positive one, but it's a good question. If anybody has the answer, I'd love to know that, because I think it's an example that's worth lifting up for not only for us, but for other folks who are interested in transportation involvement.
Can I speak to that real quick? I know we gotta end, but the work that we did with the Chicago ETOD plan, it also included a bit of a racial equity impact assessment. We did look at so in a racial equity impact assessment, you look at the burdens and the benefits of, a community issue, and that being, of course, transit oriented development. And so that helped us to kind of understand where, there are deficits in across the city, looking at the, maps with overlays of, demographics and things like that helped us to see that, of course, visually, you can see where all the development is happening in the city. But when you overlay it with, income and, opportunities that exist around it, amenities and all of those other things, it kind of helps us tell a story that residents were already expressing, but we needed to have it in a form that data, could support. And so, or it could be supported by data rather. And so that racial equity impact assessment it wasn't a full out version of a racial equity impact assessment, but it was enough to help us to see that there are racial disparities in transit oriented development. And I think having that sort of a process in these things will help us to begin to do that work and lay the groundwork, lay the groundwork for the future developments of this type of planning, to kind of look at the racial disparities and address those issues head on. And I think Chicago is really kind of leading the way in that area because this doesn't happen very often. And hopefully we'll see more cities will start to look to us and start adopting this kind of activity in their planning process.
Thank you so much, and thank you all. This has been a great conversation. I am so inspired by listening to all of you all and the work that you're doing in the field as well as in the boardrooms and in Springfield. So thank you so much. I'll turn it back over to Dawana now. Thanks, Dawana.
Thank you, Tracy. Phenomenal job, ladies. I just, everyone from Paul's introduction all the way through the conversations. I personally got a lot to take away. Provoking action, my mentors, ramping up. I got to catch up with Barbara, I only have 3. It's such a rewarding experience. I love what you said, whether you're a mentor or, a volunteer group, the diversity of those experiences always brings, fruitful interactions on both sides. I learned as much from my mentees as they like to think they're learning from me. So I really appreciate you all taking the time today. Thank you all of the everyone who joined us today, the panelists, Tracy, Paul, thank you so much. I want to thank the WTS board. We don't do this, this is not easy. It looks easy. We have a magician in the background, Shelby. Thank you so much. We appreciate all you do to help our events go off successfully. I want to just say that a lot of your conversation today was so thought-provoking, and I think it exemplifies the reason we wanted to do a series of these conversations. We could talk all night. I could listen to you guys tell stories and talk about this. Being in Chicago, born and raised, a lot of these issues are near and dear to my heart. My family uses the system, all of that. So these are conversations we'll continue to have in our personal and professional lives. So thank you again. So what I'm going to do is share a screen real quick here and close with some acknowledgements from our partners. We can't keep it going without the support of our membership and our partners. So this is our public agency partners for 2021. I just want to make sure we get an opportunity to acknowledge them and say thank you. Our executive level partners, of which Paul represented Globetrotters today. Typically when we have an event, we'll invite partners to give introductions, standard fashion as we would if we were in person, to help with our networking. And our many champion partners, again, thank you for your support of Greater Chicago. Our guardian level partners. And lastly, our advocate partners and our supporters. Thank you everyone for tuning in today, and I wish you a great evening and take care.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.